What happens when prejudice and arrogance collide with unimaginable power at 30,000 feet? You're about to hear the story of Dr. Evelyn Reed, a black woman who was told she didn't belong in first class. You'll listen to the sneering remarks from a flight attendant named Brenda and the condescending glare from a gate agent, Mark Jenkins. They thought they were just putting another person in their place. They had no idea they weren't just disrespecting a passenger. They were targeting the woman who could and would bring their entire world crashing down before the plane even landed. Stay tuned for a masterclass in consequences. The air in the Global Atlantic Airways first-class lounge at JFK was a carefully curated symphony of hushed tones and the gentle clinking of porcelain. It was a space designed to insulate its patrons from the frantic energy of the terminal just beyond its frosted glass doors. Dr. Evelyn Reed, however, felt a dissonance in the harmony. It wasn't in the air or the muted classical music. It was in the eyes of the man behind the polished marble check-in desk, Mark Jenkins. Evelyn was dressed for the grueling 9-hour flight ahead of her, followed by a car ride straight to a series of back-to-back meetings in London. Her attire was the epitome of luxurious comfort, a tailored cashmere tracksuit in a deep charcoal grey, pristine white leather sneakers and a simple silk scarf tied loosely around her neck. Her hair was styled in elegant, intricate braids that fell just past her shoulders. To the undiscerning eye, she might not have fit the stereotypical mold of a first-class passenger, the parade of stiff suits and power dresses. To Mark Jenkins, she was an anomaly to be scrutinized. "Ticket and passport," he said, his voice flat. His hand outstretched without making eye contact. Evelyn slid her dark blue passport and the first-class boarding pass from her phone across the counter. He took them, his eyes lingering on her face for a fraction of a second too long. A flicker of something unreadable, or perhaps all too readable in his gaze. He scanned the passport, then tapped at his keyboard with a methodical slowness that felt deliberate. "Dr. Evelyn Reed," he read aloud, the title sounding like a question rather than a statement. He looked from the passport photo back to her. And what kind of doctor would that be? The question was entirely unnecessary, a micro-probe to test her legitimacy. Evelyn had faced this particular brand of inquiry countless times. It was the soft, insidious cousin of overt racism, a way of saying, "Prove you belong." She offered a small, tight smile, the kind that earned a PhD in bioorganic chemistry and molecular biophysics. Mark's eyebrows raised a fraction of an inch. He seemed momentarily thrown off by the specificity and weight of her answer. He cleared his throat and returned to his screen. "I see. And you're traveling to London for business?" "Yes, a conference," she replied, keeping her voice even. The real reason was far more significant, the final stage acquisition of a UK-based pharmaceutical company, a deal that would make her firm, Ethelred Innovations, a global leader. But Mark Jenkins didn't need to know that. He continued to tap the silence, stretching uncomfortably. It seems there's a flag on your ticket, Dr. Reed. I'll need to verify the payment method." Evelyn felt a familiar coil of frustration tighten in her stomach, but her expression remained placid. "A flag I purchased this ticket 2 months ago with my corporate American Express Centurion card. I assure you the payment went through." "Standard procedure." He said the words a hollow excuse. "Sometimes these high-value transactions get flagged for secondary verification. I'm sure you understand." She understood perfectly. She understood that the impeccably dressed white man who had checked in before her, loudly complaining about his golf swing, hadn't required any secondary verification. She watched as Mark picked up his desk phone and began a quiet, performative conversation with some unseen department. He spoke in hushed tones, occasionally glancing up at her as if she were a specimen under a microscope. The minutes ticked by. Her flight, GA002, would begin boarding in less than half an hour. Other passengers were breezing through, receiving warm smiles and deferential nods from Mark's colleague. Evelyn stood her ground, a silent statue of patience she had been forced to perfect over a lifetime of such encounters. Finally, Mark hung up the phone with a sigh that suggested he had overcome a great and tedious obstacle on her behalf. "All right, everything seems to be in order," he announced as if granting her a pardon. He stamped her boarding pass with a flourish. "However, due to a late equipment change, we've had a few seat reassignments. You're still in first class, of course, but your seat has been moved from 2A to 4F. Seat 2A was a prime window seat in the quietest part of the cabin. 4F was a middle seat in the last row, closer to the galley. It was a subtle but clear downgrade in quality. "I specifically selected 2A when I booked," Evelyn stated calmly. "As I said, an equipment change." Mark repeated his tone, brooking no argument. "Unavoidable. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have other passengers to attend to." He pushed her documents back across the counter, his attention already shifting to the next person in line. Evelyn took a deep breath, collected her passport and phone, and walked away from the counter without another word. A protest would be useless. It would only be met with feigned apologies and bureaucratic stonewalling. He had done what he set out to do. He had marked her, questioned her, and put her in what he perceived to be her place. She walked towards the large windows overlooking the tarmac, watching the ground crew scurry around the massive Boeing 707 that would carry her across the Atlantic. The frustration was a low-level hum beneath her skin, a familiar energy she had learned to channel not into anger, but into fuel. Mark Jenkins had no idea the kind of engine he had just helped ignite. The call to board for first-class passengers echoed through the lounge, and Evelyn gathered her carry-on, a sleek leather satchel containing her laptop and the sensitive acquisition documents. She walked down the jet bridge, the anticipation of the flight soured by the lingering disrespect from the check-in. She hoped, as she always did, that the encounter was an isolated incident, a single point of unpleasantness in an otherwise smooth journey. Her hope evaporated the moment she stepped onto the aircraft and was greeted by the lead flight attendant, a woman in her late 40s with blonde hair pulled into a severe bun and a name tag that read Brenda. Brenda's smile was a thin, painted-on line that didn't reach her eyes. It faltered visibly as she looked at Evelyn. "Welcome aboard," Brenda said, her voice a clipped professional monotone. She glanced at Evelyn's boarding pass for seat 4F. "Right this way. Your seat is just at the back there." Evelyn navigated the plush aisle of the first-class cabin. It was configured in a 1-2-1 layout with private pods for each passenger. As she approached the final row, she saw her assigned seat, 4F, nestled between another passenger and the main walkway to the galley. The man who would be her neighbor was already settled in seat 4D, a large, florid man in his 50s, with a pinstripe suit, his tie already loosened. He was speaking loudly into his phone, one hand gesturing emphatically. This was Todd Bishop. As Evelyn began to stow her satchel in the overhead compartment, Brenda appeared at her side. "Ma'am, can I help you with that?" Brenda asked, though her tone suggested it was more of an inspection than an offer. "I'm fine, thank you," Evelyn replied easily, lifting the bag into place. "It's just that space is at a premium." Brenda continued, her eyes scanning Evelyn's simple attire again. "We want to make sure there's enough room for our other first-class passengers' belongings." The implication was clear. Evelyn and her bag were an encroachment. "My bag for Montauk fits perfectly well," Evelyn said, her voice dropping a notch, losing its earlier warmth. She closed the bin and turned to her seat. Todd Bishop had ended his call and was now watching the exchange with an expression of smug amusement. As Evelyn moved to sit down, he made no effort to move his legs, which were sprawled into her footwell. "Excuse me," Evelyn said. He looked at her, then down at his legs, and back up, a smirk playing on his lips. He slowly, grudgingly retracted them. "These seats aren't as big as they used to be," he grumbled, as if she were personally responsible for the cabin's design. Evelyn ignored him, settling into her seat and pulling out a tablet from her seat pocket. She was determined to tune out the world and focus on the final review of the acquisition proposal. But Brenda wasn't finished. She leaned in her voice, a conspiratorial whisper that was loud enough for Todd to hear. "Ma'am, I've just been reviewing the manifest, and I'm a little confused about your seat assignment. Are you sure you weren't originally booked in premium economy? Sometimes our gate agents make upgrades and the system can be a bit slow to catch up." The accusation was breathtaking in its audacity. Brenda was openly suggesting that Evelyn was a freeloader, a charity case, who had been bumped up and didn't rightly belong there. The slow burn of anger Evelyn had felt at the check-in desk now flared into a hot, sharp flame. "I can assure you," Evelyn said, her voice dangerously quiet, "that my ticket was purchased for this cabin, for this flight by my company. There has been no upgrade. There is no confusion. My name is Dr. Evelyn Reed. I suggest you check your manifest again, and this time read it carefully." Brenda recoiled slightly, taken aback by the sudden steel in Evelyn's voice. She forced another brittle smile. "Of course. I just have to be thorough." Todd Bishop, however, saw an opportunity to chime in. "Well, you can't blame her for checking," he said with a condescending chuckle. "The way these airlines give out complimentary upgrades these days, you never know who you'll end up sitting next to." He looked Evelyn up and down pointedly. "No offense." "Offense is a choice," Evelyn replied, turning to face him, her eyes locking onto his. "And you, sir, have made a very poor one." Before he could respond, Brenda chose that exact moment to escalate the situation beyond the point of no return. She placed a hand on Evelyn's armrest, adopting a tone of false sympathy. "Dr. Reed," she began. "There's been a slight complication. We have a Global Services Elite Premier member, one of our most valued flyers, who has requested a seat in this row. His assigned seat has a minor issue with its entertainment system. As you were the last to check in for this cabin, we're going to have to ask you to move." "Move where?" Evelyn asked, already knowing the answer. "We have a lovely seat for you in premium economy," Brenda said, her smile widening now, triumphant. "It's a window seat, and of course the airline will refund you the fare difference. It's really the only solution." It was a lie, a fabrication built on a foundation of prejudice. There was no elite premier member, no broken screen. There was only Brenda, her accomplice Todd, and their shared, unspoken conviction that this black woman in the cashmere tracksuit needed to be removed from their exclusive space. They saw her not as a paying customer, but as a problem to be solved, and they had just made the biggest miscalculation of their careers. The cabin, which moments before had been a low hum of quiet activity, seemed to fall silent around their small pocket of conflict. The air crackled with tension. Evelyn looked from Brenda's smug, expectant face to Todd Bishop's leering grin. They were a team, a united front of entitled condescension, They had backed her into a corner expecting a quiet, perhaps disgruntled compliance. They expected her to gather her things and perform the walk of shame back through the curtain into premium economy. Evelyn remained perfectly still. The initial flare of anger had subsided, replaced by something far more potent, a cold, crystalline clarity. She had spent 2 decades building Ethelred innovations from a 2-person startup in a cramped lab into a biotech powerhouse. She had navigated boardrooms filled with men who underestimated her, negotiated with investors who doubted her, and shattered every ceiling placed above her. She had done it not with loud aggression, but with superior intellect, unshakable resolve, and a strategic mind that could see 10 moves ahead. Brenda and Todd, in their petty arrogance, had just declared a game of chess. They didn't realize they were playing against a grand master. "Let me be perfectly clear," Evelyn said, her voice low and even, each word carefully enunciated. "I will not be moving from this seat. This is the seat I paid for, and this is the seat I will be occupying for the duration of this flight to London." Brenda's smile vanished, replaced by a mask of stern authority. "Ma'am, I'm not asking. We have a priority passenger situation. If you refuse to cooperate, I'll have to involve the captain and airport security. We can have you removed from the flight for non-compliance." It was the nuclear option, the ultimate threat. The accusation hung in the air that she, a black woman, was being disruptive and uncooperative. It was a narrative she had seen play out countless times in viral videos and news stories. Todd Bishop scoffed loudly. "Just take the deal, lady. You're getting a refund. What's the problem? People like you should be grateful for the chance to even be up here in the first place." People like you. There it was. The prejudice, stripped of all its flimsy veils and polite language, laid bare in the aisle of a multi-million-dollar aircraft. The phrase echoed in the chambers of Evelyn's mind, connecting back to 1,000 other subtle slights and overt aggressions. The teacher who questioned if she'd written her own paper. The landlord who said the apartment was suddenly unavailable. The investor who asked who the main brain behind her company was. People like you. Evelyn slowly turned her head and looked at Todd Bishop. She didn't say a word. She simply held his gaze. There was no anger in her eyes now, only an unnerving calm that seemed to unnerve him far more than any shouted retort could have. He shifted in his seat, his bravado faltering under the weight of her silent scrutiny. She then turned back to Brenda. "You want to involve the captain? Please do. You want to call security? Be my guest. But before you do, I recommend you advise them to wait just 5 minutes, because this situation is about to change in a way you are not prepared for." Brenda's face hardened. "I don't have time for pen tool or threats. You have 2 minutes to gather your belongings." "It's not a threat," Evelyn replied, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching her lips for the first time. It was not a smile of amusement, but of impending victory. "It's a courtesy. I'm giving you a chance to reconsider your course of action." "Because you, Todd," she said, nodding at the man beside her without looking away from Brenda. "And you. Brenda have fundamentally misunderstood who I am. You have made an assumption based on what you see, and it is the single most expensive assumption either of you will ever make." With that, Evelyn reached into her satchel and retrieved her phone. Her movements were deliberate, unhurried. The other first-class passengers were now openly staring, their quiet conversations abandoned. A sense of theater had descended upon the cabin. Brenda crossed her arms, a look of defiant impatience on her face. "The clock is ticking, ma'am." "Indeed it is," Evelyn said softly, her thumb swiping across the screen. She located a number in her contacts list, a number reserved for the most critical of situations. She pressed the call button and lifted the phone to her ear. The first ring had not even finished before a calm, professional voice answered on the other end. "Amelia, good morning," Evelyn said, her voice as clear as a bell. "I apologize for the early call. I have an urgent time-sensitive directive for you. Are you at your desk?" A pause. "Excellent. I am currently on Global Atlantic Flight GA002, scheduled to depart from JFK to Heathrow. I require you to perform a transaction. It's an unusual one. I need you to contact our corporate liaison at Global Atlantic's Global Services Elite Desk. Their name is David Chen. His direct line is in our files. Tell him that Dr. Evelyn Reed, on behalf of the Ethelred Innovations corporate account, wishes to purchase every single unoccupied seat in the first-class cabin on this flight, effective immediately." A stunned silence fell over the aisle. Todd Bishop's jaw went slack. Brenda's eyes widened in disbelief, her arms slowly uncrossing. Evelyn continued, her voice unwavering. "That's correct, Amelia. All of them. There are 16 seats in this cabin. I am in one. I believe there are 7 other passengers. That leaves 8 seats. Purchase them. Use the Centurion card. Price is not a concern. I need a digital confirmation sent directly to the purser's terminal on this aircraft within the next 3 minutes. Can you do that for me?" She listened for a moment, a serene expression on her face. "Thank you, Amelia. You're the best. I'll speak to you when I land." Evelyn ended the call and placed her phone face down on her armrest. She folded her hands in her lap and looked up at Brenda, whose face had paled to the color of chalk. "As I said," Evelyn whispered, "the situation has changed." The 3 minutes that followed felt like an eternity. The air in the first-class cabin was thick with a mixture of shock, disbelief, and dawning horror. Brenda stood frozen in the aisle, her mind visibly struggling to process the words she had just overheard. Todd Bishop, for his part, looked as if he'd been struck by lightning. He kept glancing from Evelyn's calm, composed face to Brenda's terrified one, his own smug certainty completely obliterated. Other passengers, who had been trying to mind their own business, were now fully invested, whispering to each other, their eyes wide. They had all witnessed the preceding conflict, and now they were witnessing a response so audacious, so utterly outside the realm of normal human interaction, that it felt like a scene from a movie. Brenda was the first to find her voice, though it was shaky and uncertain. "Ma'am, that's not possible. You can't just buy seats on a plane that's about to depart." "Can't I?" Evelyn replied, her gaze steady. Ethelred Innovations is one of Global Atlantic's top 5 corporate accounts worldwide. We spend upwards of $20 million a year with this airline. I assure you, when my assistant Amelia calls your global services desk and invokes my name with an order, it gets fulfilled. No questions asked. Your corporate sales department values my company's business far more than you value your personal prejudices. Each word was a perfectly aimed dart puncturing Brenda's blustering facade. The mention of personal prejudices hit its mark with devastating accuracy. A flush of crimson crept up Brenda's neck. She stammered, I was just following procedure." "No." Evelyn cut her off. Her voice still quiet, but now carrying an edge of command that was impossible to ignore. "You were not following procedure. You were on a power trip. You colluded with another passenger to harass Erttaul and intimidate me, culminating in an attempt to illegally downgrade me from a ticket I paid for. You fabricated a story about an elite Premier member and a broken screen. I'm in seat 4F, Brenda, right next to the galley. I can hear every word you and your colleagues say. I heard you talking to your fellow flight attendant, Susan, just before this, saying you needed to deal with the situation in 4F. There is no situation, Brenda. There is only you. Brenda's face went from mellow to ashen. She was exposed, her lies unraveled in front of an audience of her most valuable customers. Just then a soft chime emanated from the purser's station at the front of the cabin. It was the sound of an incoming message from the ground. Another flight attendant, a younger woman named Susan, whom Evelyn had just mentioned, looked at her screen. Her eyes widened, and she looked down the aisle at Brenda, her expression a mixture of panic and awe. She beckoned to Brenda with a trembling hand. Brenda walked toward the station, as if in a trance. She stared at the screen, her lips moving as she read the text. The passengers watched her, a jury, observing the verdict being read. They saw her shoulders slump, her entire body seeming to deflate as the reality of the message sank in. She turned around slowly and walked back to Evelyn's seat. Her entire demeanor had changed. The haughty, authoritative flight attendant was gone, replaced by a terrified employee who knew she was on the verge of losing her job. "Dr. Reed," Brenda said, her voice barely a whisper. We've received confirmation. The 8 remaining first-class suites have been purchased by Ethelred Innovations on your behalf. The cabin is yours." A collective gasp went through the cabin. It was true. She had actually done it. Evelyn gave a slow, deliberate nod. "Good. I'm glad we've cleared that up. Now we have a new seating arrangement to discuss. Since I am now the lessee of these seats, I have some say in the matter of who occupies the space around me. Please consider suites 1A, 1F, 2A, 2D, 3A, 3F, 4A, and 4D to be my private property for this flight." She paused, letting the scope of her control sink in. "The other passengers," she continued, gesturing to a quiet couple in the front row, and a few others who had remained silent, "are welcome to remain in their seats as my guests. I have no issue with them." Then she turned her head, her gaze finally settling on the man who had been a catalyst for the entire ordeal. "Mr. Bishop," she said, her voice devoid of any emotion. "You, however, are in seat 4D. That seat as of 2 minutes ago belongs to me, and I do not wish for you to be my guest. Brenda, you were so concerned about finding an appropriate seat for me in another cabin. I trust you can now extend the same courtesy to Mr. Bishop. Please find him a seat in economy, a middle seat in the last row if possible. I believe that would be most appropriate." Todd Bishop's face, which had been pale with shock, was now turning a blotchy, furious red. "This is insane. You can't do this. I'm a paying customer." "You were a paying customer," Evelyn corrected him gently. "Now you are a trespasser on my property. The airline will be issuing you a full refund for your first-class ticket, as is their policy. But your presence in this cabin is no longer welcome. By me." She turned her implacable gaze back to Brenda. "Please escort Mr. Bishop out of my cabin. Now." The command hung in the air, absolute and undeniable. For a moment, no one moved. Todd Bishop stared at Evelyn, his mouth opening and closing like a fish, unable to formulate a coherent protest against the sheer, breathtaking audacity of what was happening. He had started this fight, egged on by a prejudiced flight attendant, and had just lost in the most spectacular and humiliating way imaginable. Brenda, trapped between a furious passenger and the woman who now effectively owned the cabin, was paralyzed. Her authority had been stripped away, her procedural manual rendered utterly useless. "Brenda," Evelyn's voice cut through the silence, sharp as glass. "Do you require assistance in following my instructions? Perhaps the captain should be involved after all. I'm sure he would be very interested to learn why a routine boarding process has resulted in his airline losing a multi-million-dollar corporate account." The threat no longer about security removing her, but about the financial fallout for Global Atlantic was the final push Brenda needed. The fear for her job eclipsed everything else. "Mr. Bishop," she said, her voice trembling. "Please, gather your things. I need to ask you to come with me." "Are you serious?" Todd roared, finally finding his voice. "You're going to listen to her? I'm an executive vice president at Sterling Thorne. I have platinum status. I'll have your job for this." But his threats, which might have worked on Brenda 20 minutes ago, were now hollow. He was threatening a pawn when the Queen had just taken control of the board. "Sir, please," Brenda pleaded, her professionalism a pathetic shred of what it had been. "I have to insist." Todd Bishop looked around for support, but found none. The other passengers either stared at him with cold disapproval or pointedly looked away, wanting no part of his self-inflicted humiliation. He had shown his true colors, and no one was coming to his defense. With a sputtering curse, he began to angrily shove his belongings back into his briefcase, the snaps echoing loudly in the tense cabin. As he stood up, red-faced and fuming, a new figure appeared at the front of the cabin. It was the captain, a tall man with silvering hair and an air of calm authority. His name tag read, Captain Robert Miller. He had clearly been summoned due to the commotion. "What seems to be the problem here?" Captain Miller asked, his eyes surveying the scene. Brenda's terrified expression, Todd Bishop's rage, and Evelyn's immovable composure. Before Brenda could offer a stammering, self-serving explanation, Evelyn spoke. "Captain, thank you for coming. The problem has just been resolved. This gentleman," she said, nodding towards Todd, "was a passenger in a seat that my company has since purchased. Your flight attendant Brenda is just escorting him to his new seat assignment in a different cabin." Captain Miller's eyebrows shot up. He looked at the purser's screen, saw the confirmation message from corporate, and his entire demeanor shifted. He was a seasoned pilot. He understood the difference between a disruptive passenger and a major corporate client. He instantly knew who held the power in this situation. He turned to Todd. "Sir, I understand you're being relocated. Please cooperate with the flight crew. We need to close the doors and depart on schedule." His voice was polite but firm, leaving no room for argument. Defeated Todd Bishop snatched his briefcase and, without another word, followed a shame-faced Brenda through the curtain into the main cabin, leaving a wake of stunned silence behind him. Captain Miller then walked directly to Evelyn's seat. He leaned in his voice low and sincere. "Dr. Reed, on behalf of Global Atlantic Airways, I want to offer you my most profound and sincere apology. I was just briefed by the purser on the events that led to this. What you experienced is unacceptable, unprofessional, and is not representative of the standards we strive to uphold. This will be dealt with, I assure you." "Thank you, Captain," Evelyn replied, appreciating his directness. "I trust that it will be. Is there anything at all I can do to make your flight more comfortable?" he asked. Evelyn considered this. "The cabin is now quite empty. Please inform the other passengers that they are free to move to any of the unoccupied window or aisle seats with my compliments. As for me, I would like my original seat, 2A. "Of course," the captain said immediately. He turned to the other flight attendant, Susan, who had watched the entire affair with wide-eyed shock. "Susan, please assist Dr. Reed in moving her belongings to Suite 2A, and please take care of our other guests." Susan, unlike Brenda, was professional and respectful, her face conveying a clear apology. "Right away, Captain. Dr. Reed, please let me help you." As Evelyn gathered her satchel to move to her new superior seat, Captain Miller turned his attention to Brenda, who had just returned from her grim task. "Brenda," he said, his voice now devoid of its earlier warmth, a chilling command in its place. "You will be on galley duty for the remainder of this flight. You will not interact with any passengers in this cabin. Susan will be handling all first-class service. When we land at Heathrow, you and I will be having a conversation with the ground station manager. Is that understood?" "Yes, Captain," Brenda whispered, her face ashen. The public dressing down was the final nail in the coffin of her authority, and most likely her career. She retreated to the galley, avoiding Evelyn's gaze, a fallen queen in her own small kingdom. Evelyn settled into Suite 2A, the plush leather seat she had chosen months ago. The cabin was quiet now, the tension replaced by a palpable sense of awe. She looked out the window at the bustling tarmac of JFK. The engines began to whine, the gentle hum, a promise of departure. She had faced down ugliness and prejudice, and had not just overcome it, but dismantled the entire power structure that enabled it. The flight to London was just beginning, but for Brenda. Mark Jenkins and Todd Bishop, the consequences were already in motion, a cascade of karma set to hit them the moment the wheels touched down. The 9-hour flight across the Atlantic was for Evelyn the most peaceful and productive she had ever experienced. With the cabin nearly empty and a new, deeply respectful flight crew attending to her every need, she was able to work, rest, and prepare for the monumental meeting ahead. Susan, the flight attendant who had taken over, was the model of professionalism, addressing Evelyn with deference and ensuring her journey was seamless. From the galley, Evelyn would occasionally hear the quiet, miserable clatter of Brenda performing her menial duties, a ghost in the machine she once commanded. Upon landing at Heathrow, Evelyn was the first to deplane. Waiting for her at the end of the jet bridge was not the usual airport concierge, but a man in a sharp suit, holding a sign that read, "Dr. Reed." He introduced himself as Simon Penhaligon, the UK Director of Corporate Relations for Global Atlantic Airways. "Dr. Reed," he said, his expression grave. "Welcome to London. Please allow me to apologize once again on behalf of our airline. The events on your flight were inexcusable. We have arranged for a private car to take you directly to your destination, and we've fast-tracked your arrival through customs and immigration." "Thank you, Mr. Penhaligon," Evelyn said, recognizing the well-oiled machinery of corporate damage control swinging into action. As they walked swiftly through the private diplomatic channels of the airport, he continued. Captain Miller filed a comprehensive report mid-flight. Our US-based executive team was alerted immediately. I can confirm that both the gate agent, Mark Jenkins, and the flight attendant, Brenda Kowalski, have been suspended pending a full investigation, which I assure you will be swift and decisive. Evelyn simply nodded. The airline's internal justice was a secondary concern to her now. Her mind was on the prize, the final negotiations for the acquisition of Sterling Thorne Pharmaceuticals, a venerable British firm whose groundbreaking research in neuroregenerative medicine would perfectly complement Ethelred's own work. Her car, a sleek black Bentley, was waiting on the tarmac. As her driver loaded her luggage, her phone buzzed. It was a text from Amelia. "Amelia. All set for the 11 a.m. Sterling Thorne's team is confirmed. Their lead negotiator is their EVP of North American Operations, a Mr. Todd Bishop. Hope the flight was restful. Evelyn stopped dead on the tarmac. The London morning was cool and grey, but a bolt of lightning seemed to flash behind her eyes. Todd Bishop, Executive Vice President. Sterling Thorne. It couldn't be. The loud, obnoxious, pin-striped man who had told her that people like you should be grateful. The man she had just unceremoniously banished to the back of the plane. He was not just some random arrogant passenger. He was the man she was about to negotiate with for the future of both their companies. A slow, wry smile spread across Evelyn's face. The universe didn't just serve karma. It served it on a silver platter with a side of exquisite irony. Todd Bishop had no idea who she was. He had insulted, belittled, and challenged a woman he assumed was beneath him, all while being completely oblivious that his career, his company's future, and the biggest deal of his life rested entirely in her hands. The game had just changed once more. This was no longer just about a personal slight. It was about business. Todd Bishop had not only shown her his character, he had given her the ultimate piece of leverage. He had demonstrated a profound lack of judgment, an inherent prejudice, and an arrogance that would be a catastrophic liability in any company she owned. She got into the car and typed a reply to Amelia. Evelyn Flight was illuminating. Amelia, I need you to do something for me immediately. Get David Chen at Global Atlantic back on the line. Request the full passenger manifest for GA002. Then cross-reference it with the employee roster from Sterling Thorne. I have a suspicion our boorish friend from 4D is who we think he is. Also, I want you to draft a new opening for my negotiation presentation. Title it, On Character, Competence, and Corporate Culture. As the Bentley sped away from the airport and towards the gleaming skyscrapers of central London, Evelyn felt a profound sense of calm. The unpleasantness of the flight had transformed. It was no longer a personal insult to be endured, but a strategic advantage to be deployed. Todd Bishop thought he was flying to London to negotiate a deal. He was in fact flying to his own professional execution, and he had spent the entire 9-hour journey blissfully unaware that his executioner was sitting just a few rows ahead of him. The boardroom at Sterling Thorne's London headquarters was a study in old-world corporate power. Dark mahogany walls, a vast polished table, and floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city. The British contingent of the Sterling Thorne team was already seated, a collection of stoic, grey-haired executives. They stood politely as Dr. Evelyn Reed and her small legal team from Ethelred Innovations were shown in. Evelyn was no longer in her comfortable travel attire. She wore a bespoke sapphire blue power suit. Her hair was immaculate, and she carried an aura of absolute command. She shook hands with each member of the British team, her greetings warm but direct. "We're just waiting on our North American EVP, Todd Bishop," said Sir Richard Covington, the aging CEO of Sterling Thorne. "His flight just landed this morning. He should be joining us momentarily." "I'm sure he will," Evelyn said, her voice smooth as silk. Right on cue, the boardroom doors swung open, and in bustled Todd Bishop. He was flustered, his suit rumpled from a sleepless, uncomfortable night in a middle seat in economy. His hair was askew, and his face was still blotchy with residual anger and humiliation. "Apologies, Sir Richard, everyone," he blustered. "Had the most horrendous travel experience of my life. An absolute nightmare with the airline." His voice trailed off as he turned and saw who was standing at the head of the table. His eyes locked with Evelyn's. The color drained from his face. It was a moment of pure cinematic shock. The bloodshot, rumpled man in the wrinkled suit was staring at the poised, powerful woman, he had tried to have thrown out of first class. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. He looked around the room at his bosses at her team, and back to her, his mind struggling to compute the impossible reality. Evelyn offered him a cool, placid smile. "Mr. Bishop, we've met. I was on your flight. I trust you found your accommodations suitable." Sir Richard looked between them, confused. "You two know each other. We became acquainted yesterday," Evelyn stated, turning her full attention to the Sterling Thorne CEO. "In fact, our interaction provided me with some unexpected and valuable insight into the corporate culture you have cultivated at Sterling Thorne, particularly within your North American leadership." She gestured for her team to distribute a folder to everyone at the table, except for Todd. "Gentlemen, I came here today prepared to finalize an acquisition at the agreed-upon price of $4.2 billion. However, events of the last 24 hours have forced me to reconsider." A nervous murmur went through the room. Todd Bishop looked like he was about to be physically ill. "An acquisition isn't just about assets and intellectual property," Evelyn continued, her voice resonating with authority. "It's about people. It's about culture. And the designated lead negotiator for your company, Mr. Bishop, demonstrated a level of prejudice, poor judgment, and profound unprofessionalism that I find frankly alarming. He showed a willingness to harass a fellow passenger based on her race and appearance, and then lied to the flight crew to try and have her removed from a seat she paid for. That isn't just poor character. It's a catastrophic business liability." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle in the silent room. "This morning I had my team look into Mr. Bishop's tenure. We found 2 prior HR complaints for inappropriate remarks and a history of high employee turnover in his department. It seems the behavior I witnessed was not an anomaly, but a pattern." Sir Richard Covington's face was a thundercloud. He stared at Todd with an expression of utter fury. Todd, for his part, could only stand there speechless and exposed. "Therefore," Evelyn announced, "Ethelred Innovations is presenting a revised offer. We are reducing our bid by 15% to $3.57 billion. This $630 million reduction reflects the significant cost we will incur to clean up the toxic leadership culture Mr. Bishop represents, and to repair the potential brand damage associated with it. Furthermore, our offer is now contingent on the immediate termination of Mr. Bishop's employment for cause." The room erupted. The Sterling Thorne executives were in shock, but they were also businessmen. They looked at Todd, the source of this disaster, and then at the revised offer, still a generous one, though significantly less than they had hoped. The choice was clear. Todd finally spoke, his voice a desperate croak. This is a personal vendetta. You can't. A vendetta, Mr. Bishop." Evelyn interrupted, her voice dropping to an icy whisper. "No, this is a consequence. You made a choice on that airplane. You chose to judge a person based on your own bigotry. You chose to be cruel. You chose to abuse your sense of privilege. And today, right now, you are experiencing the full return on that investment. You sowed the wind, and this is your whirlwind." Sir Richard Covington slammed his hand on the table. "Todd, you're fired. Get out. Security will escort you from the building." And just like that, it was over. Todd Bishop's career built on bluster and entitlement was annihilated in less than 5 minutes. He was led from the room, a broken man who had single-handedly cost his company over $500 million because he couldn't stand the sight of a black woman in first class. The story didn't end there. The news of the revised deal and the reason for it sent shockwaves through the financial world. Global Atlantic Airways, in a desperate attempt to appease their furious corporate client publicly, fired both Brenda Kowalski and Mark Jenkins. Their names were leaked to the press, and the story of their prejudice went viral, rendering them unemployable in the airline industry. The airline also issued a public apology to Dr. Reed and made a multi-million-dollar donation to her chosen charity, a STEM education fund for underprivileged women of color. Dr. Evelyn Reed, having concluded her business, flew back to New York a week later. She was, of course, in seat 2A. As she settled in for the flight, the new lead flight attendant approached her. "Dr. Reed," the attendant said, her voice filled with genuine respect. "Welcome aboard. Is there anything at all we can get for you?" Evelyn looked at her, then around the quiet, orderly cabin. She smiled, a real warm smile this time. "No, thank you," she said. "Everything is exactly as it should be." 6 months after the flight that became a legend in corporate circles, the view from Dr. Evelyn Reed's office was different. It was no longer just the sprawling skyline of New York. It was a live video feed of a state-of-the-art laboratory in Cambridge, England. The acquisition of Sterling Thorne, now the Ethelred Thorne European Research Division, was complete, and the integration was proceeding with ruthless efficiency. The $630 million she had stripped from the purchase price had been reinvested directly into the company funding new research upgrading facilities, and most importantly, overhauling the corporate culture from the ground up. Evelyn was addressing the combined leadership of the transatlantic company. Her face was projected onto a massive screen in the London boardroom, where Todd Bishop's career had been dismantled. "Good morning, everyone," she began, her voice calm and measured. "I want to talk about our core values, not the plaques we hang on the wall, but the principles that guide every decision we make. We are a company built on innovation data and relentless pursuit of excellence. But underpinning all of that is a simple, non-negotiable principle: respect. We judge our colleagues on the quality of their work and the content of their character. Nothing else." She didn't need to mention the incident on flight GA002. Everyone in the room on both sides of the Atlantic knew the story. It had become a founding myth of the new integrated company, a cautionary tale and a mission statement rolled into one. The message was clear: the old ways of doing business, the subtle nods to privilege and the quiet tolerance of prejudice were over. The consequences of that day had continued to ripple outwards, far beyond the confines of the airplane or the boardroom. For Todd Bishop, the fall had been swift and absolute. After being escorted from the Sterling Thorne building, he had attempted to launch a lawsuit for wrongful termination. It was summarily dismissed when Ethelred's legal team presented a mountain of evidence: Captain Miller's detailed flight report, sworn affidavits from 3 other first-class passengers, the HR complaints from his past, and a precise calculation of the $630 million in shareholder value he had personally vaporized. His name became synonymous with corporate malpractice. No executive search firm would touch him. The last anyone heard, he was doing freelance consulting work for a small, obscure logistics company in Ohio. His pinstripe suits traded for off-the-rack polyester. His punishment wasn't poverty, but irrelevance, a ghost of his former arrogance haunting the periphery of the world he once felt he commanded. The digital guillotine of public opinion had fallen just as mercilessly on Brenda Kowalski and Mark Jenkins. After their firings, their story became a textbook example of customer service failure in the social media age. Though Global Atlantic never officially released their full names, they were quickly identified on industry forums and anonymous blogs. in a world where a Google search is the first step of any background check. Their professional lives were over. Brenda, who had lorded over her metal tube in the sky, found she couldn't even get a job as a receptionist. She was last seen working the holiday season at a Macy's fragrance counter, her painted-on smile now one of genuine desperation. Mark Jenkins simply disappeared. His digital footprint erased, having reportedly moved back in with his parents. His petty tyranny at the check-in desk reduced to a bitter memory. Global Atlantic Airways, however, had learned its lesson. Spurred by the fury of one of its largest clients, the airline had instituted a mandatory top-to-bottom diversity and de-escalation training program. It was developed in consultation with a firm recommended by Evelyn herself. Internally, airline staff referred to it as the GA02 initiative. The story of the flight, with names and details changed, became the central source study in their training modules, a stark illustration of how two employees, through a series of poor, prejudiced choices, could cost the company millions and inflict immeasurable damage upon its brand. Back in her office, Evelyn concluded her address. She looked at the faces on the screen, the veteran British scientists and the ambitious young American executives, all now part of one team. "We are building the future of medicine here," she said, her voice filled with a quiet passion. "That is a profound responsibility, and it requires the best from all of us, the best ideas, the best research, and the best character. Let's get to work." The screen went dark. Evelyn leaned back in her chair, the silence of her office a welcome comfort. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from the charity she had directed Global Atlantic's donation to. It was a photo of 15 bright-eyed young women recipients of the first ever Ethelred Innovator Scholarship, standing in front of their university's science building. Evelyn smiled. It had started with a quiet affront, an attempt to make her feel small. But it had ended with this. It had ended with a toxic corporate culture being cleansed with accountability, being served, and with new doors being opened for a generation of women who would follow in her footsteps. She hadn't just bought out a first-class cabin. She had invested in a future where belonging was never in question. And that is the incredible story of Dr. Evelyn Reed. A story that shows us that the person you underestimate could be the one who holds all the cards. The actions of Mark, Brenda, and Todd weren't just rude. They were a symptom of a deep-seated prejudice that assumes power and success look a certain way. They learned the hard way that character is destiny, and karma keeps meticulous records. Dr. Reed didn't just buy a few plane seats. She bought accountability. She forced a reckoning that echoed from an airplane aisle all the way to a corporate boardroom in London. What did you think of her epic response? Was it justice? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were moved by this story of prejudice meeting its ultimate downfall, please hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next story. Thanks for listening.